Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tim. I am the exhibit technician here at the Mariners Museum. In a moment, John Quarstein will be presenting on the CSS Albemarle. Before we start, I just want to get a few things out of the way. First of all, a link to the images used in the presentation today is in the description below. We'll also be having a Q&A session after, so go ahead and put some questions that you have in the comment section, and John will answer those at the end. And then finally, please like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of thing. So now I'll turn it over to John. So thanks for watching.
Hello there, John Quarstein. I'm here in my house, and I'm happy to tell you one of my favorite stories about the Civil War. That is all about the Cornfield Ironclad. That's right. The Confederates were so desperate for building ironclads that in one case, they built the hull and the shield, everything, in a cornfield at a place known as Edwards Ferry, North Carolina. That's real close to a town called Scotland Neck, North Carolina today. So why did they want to build ironclads in North Carolina? Well, the big problem was in end of August 1861, they actually the Union was able to capture Hatteras Inlet. Then they came and captured Roanoke Island in February. They then, between February and April, the end of April, they will capture towns like Plymouth, Elizabeth City, Washington, Little Washington, North Carolina, New Bern, North Carolina, Beaufort, North Carolina, and I have to tell you, they're in control of this rich agricultural region. Now, one thing, the Confederates wanted that space back because of the agricultural production. So end of 1862, they looked to build a series of ironclads in North Carolina. There are three major ones outside of Wilmington. And so one is going to be built near Kinston. Actually, that would be known as the CSS Noose, which actually go to Kinston and you can see it. Then they started building one in Tarboro, never named it because the Federals went up the river and shelled the building site. The Confederates then concentrate on just two of those ironclads, the Noose and the one at Edwards Ferry known as the Albemarle. Gilbert Elliott and his partner William Martin, will actually get a contract to build an ironclad. And the idea is they have to build it way upriver. So number one, it's got to have a shallow draft. Number two, it has to be able to negotiate the rivers to get down into the sounds. So it can't have a great length. It's got to have fairly effective engines, and then it has to have all this iron. So basically, when they start building the ship, a commander is going to be named of the Albemarle. His name is Captain James Cook. He's originally from Beaufort, North Carolina, and Cook got the nickname as the Ironmonger Captain because what he did is he went everywhere he could in North Carolina to get railroad rails, to get any type of scrap iron. Then, because Edwards Ferry is very close to Halifax, which is very close to Weldon, and you have the Weldon Railroad that goes right up to Richmond. And so he ships up the raw iron, and Tredegar turns it into iron plate, ships it back down to Halifax. Boom, we start building this ship. Oh, gosh, I got to tell you. It is going to be an unusual ship. It's really designed perfectly for the waters in which it is intended for. So number one, she has a 9-foot draft. She has a beam of 35.4 feet, and she also has a length of 158 feet. And I'm going to show you it in process, okay? There you go. That's the Cornfield Ironclad. That's the work site. That's Edwards Ferry. Actually, Peter Smith owned that plantation. He became the construction boss, so to speak. And you can see them placing on the last course of the 2-inch iron plate. So, the Ironclad is a unique. Now, let's take a look at the hull. Notice off to the right, the ram is built in. Remember what happened to the Virginia's ram? It broke off during its ramming of the Cumberland. So this is built in so they don't lose that. Furthermore, you're going to see just 3 gun ports here, but they actually have a total of 6 gun ports. And once again, they are worried about weight. And so it is fitted with 2 non-horizontal acting engines, which basically had 2 boilers, the twin screws. The engines were actually built by Gilbert Elliott himself, because engines in the South were terrible. It's listed with a speed of 4 knots, but I think it's a little faster. But nevertheless, I can't tell you the truth. So it's got 4 inches of iron plate. In other words, 2 layers of 2-inch iron plate, backed by 17 feet of pine backing. And then it has 2 guns. Now, let me tell you, they're pivot guns. They're 6.4-inch Brook double-banded rifles. And what I mean by double-banded, in other words, these things aren't going to burst. They're on a pivot mount. So when you look at this picture, the forward is going to be where that Brook gun comes. Then it can rotate on its pivot and fire out that gun port as well as the other side's gun port. Each gun had a 180-degree range of fire. You can fire them in broadside. So they have a 360-degree, in other words, total ability to turn the guns to fight the enemy. And that's very unique. The 2 guns are there because, that's it's all about weight. And so you can see the knuckle of the ship. Now, what gets really pretty interesting is that this ship is going to actually have what we call a diamond pattern casemate. In other words, I'm going to show you another picture. Basically, oh my gosh, you can see there, 30-degree slope. It has iron shutters so they can close the gun ports. You can see that they use straight angles. The Virginia had a rounded forward and stern casemate. So this is easier to make, more effective, and actually is very good at causing shot to bounce off. So the ram is 4 feet in length. So what are we going to do? Well, there's a grand strategy going on, and that grand strategy talks all about the Confederacy wanting to regain much of eastern North Carolina. So they're building these 2 ships, the Noose and the Albemarle. The Albemarle is supposed to come down, capture Plymouth, and liberate Little Washington and Edenton, while the Noose is supposed to come down and liberate New Bern. Now, I got to tell you what's so good about this, that the Confederates, no monitor can get into the North Carolina Sounds because of their deep draft. So if you are the only people with an ironclad, you're definitely going to win. So in March, Lee detaches George Pickett to go down into North Carolina with the purpose of trying to capture New Bern. The time ticks by, the Noose isn't ready, and so he then goes back to Virginia because the campaign season is about to reopen in Virginia, but he leaves Robert Hoke's division to attack Plymouth, North Carolina. Plymouth, North Carolina is commanded by George Wetzel's, and Wetzel actually has a strong garrison. He also has two major gunboats protecting him, and they will be the Southfield and the Miami. Oh my gosh. So these are double enders, paddle wheels, rather fast. And so in essence, we are going to see that the Confederates are planning this grand strategy. So Hoke goes and meets with James Cook and says, hey, when are you going to come down? And he says, we're going to be downriver by the 18th. Well, let me tell you, the ship is commissioned on April 17. People are still working on the ship as they start to go downriver. Sadly, the engines break down, and so they have to take half of a day to fix those engines. So by the evening of the 18th, the Albemarle is going to be right at the obstructions that the Federals had sunk in the river, and because of spring rains, there's 10 feet over the obstructions, which the Confederates check, and so they know they can get through. So in the early morning of April 19th, down comes the Albemarle, and it passes Fort Gray on Warren's Neck, and then it will start to get shelled, but nothing happens to the Albemarle. Shots just bounce off of it. Well, this is the most powerful scene that we have, and this is actually the Albemarle when Commander Cook, as he's approaching these two ships, he sees a hawse line between the two ships. And so he veers his ironclad towards the shore and then rushes back in front to strike. He clips the bow of the Miami, which is the ship to the left, and then rams into the Southfield. The Southfield doesn't have a chance. I mean, when it's rammed, it immediately begins to sink. Oh my gosh, the ram is logged in the Southfield. You can see the water over the gun port there. So it looks like a wasp, you could only sting once. However, what they will do is the Southfield, as it sinks, will roll off the ram and sinks. And so the water is 12 feet deep where this happens. So you can still see the superstructure of the Southfield. Now, the Miami is commanded by Lieutenant Commander Charles Flusher. And Flusher is mad as a hornet because of what has happened to the sister ship. So he begins shelling the Albemarle, and they watch the shells just bounce right off the 30-degree slope. I gotta tell you, he fires one shell with a 12-second fuse. It hits the side of the Albemarle, rises up in the air, and lands at the feet of Flusher. And of course, he got flushed, or he was killed. And so the Miami, partially damaged from the guns of the Albemarle, beats it back down river, and the Albemarle is going to chase it. As you can see, there's the wreck of the Southfield. There's the Albemarle chasing the Miami, and the Miami suffers significant damage. So I have to say, this is a tremendous battle that is going to really change what is happening in Eastern North Carolina. The Confederates have the only ironclad in the Sounds, and so basically they're going to be able to liberate these several towns: Plymouth, Edenton, Little Washington, and a very rich agricultural region. And so the Confederates are overjoyed. As a result of this, we see there's going to be even greater grand strategy, because the Confederates decide to go against New Bern. Now, I got to tell you, just remember, April 19, they sink the Southfield. And so what will transpire is the Confederates plan to have 2 ironclads support the attack against New Bern. However, one of those ironclads, I have to say, is the Noose. And the Noose, when they launch her, gets stuck in the mud and can't come. And I will pick up the rest of the story about the Albemarle and how it achieved greatness and then sadness. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I think I went over my limit like I always do. So next, I think next Friday, if I remember correctly, I'm closing out this story with the Battle of Albemarle Sound, and then also the sinking, which is a daring act. And you know, the Federals just don't know what to do about the Albemarle. And because of that, they try to figure out what they can do to stop the hero of the Albemarle. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, we've got a question here for you, John. What training did 19-year-old Elliot have to get the contract to build Ironclad?
Well, not a whole lot. He was an apprentice in a machine shop in Elizabeth City. When Elizabeth City was abandoned, he then heads to Halifax. There, he recognizes while all this is happening, the Virginia has sunk the Congress and Cumberland. The Battle of the Ironclads has taken place. Everyone has ram fever. In other words, I got to build ironclads if I'm going to be able to protect my harbors. So every Confederate port is going to have ironclads being built. Gilbert Elliot knows the Roanoke River, knows the conditions he has to build this ironclad in. So he does some sketches of what he says he can do. He sends them to Stephen Russell Mallory, the Confederate Secretary of the Navy, and Mallory says, yeah, we can do that. So Chief Naval Constructor John Luke Porter will actually put them into plans. And so the ship has a flat bottom, that built-in ram, and the 360 degree range of fire. So those are all concepts. And the idea of this diamond causes less time to build. It is very effective against 100-pounder, 150-pounder Parrott guns. Probably the only gun that we learned during the Civil War, the only gun that can really damage a Confederate ironclad is going to be a 15-inch Dahlgren shell gun firing solid shot. And so, but they don't have any of those guns in Albemarle Sound. They, unfortunately, they have Dahlgrens, but 9-inch, 11-inch. They have numerous Parrott rifles, but they were prone to bursting. I should do a whole story about making rifle cannon during the Civil War. In fact, I will, so that's Gilbert Elliot is, learned to build, work as a mechanic, and had a concept, and that concept was turned into reality.
Okay, we've got one here for you. What were the delays with the Noose?
Oh my gosh. The Noose is a really sad story because they actually build it a little farther upriver to try and stay away from Union gunboats at a place called Whitehall. And so while they're building it, a Union gunboat comes up and shells the Noose. Actually, there's if you were there, you would have seen traces of burn marks on the wooden casemate. So the Federals, however, don't go back to try and damage the Noose. The Noose is then brought downriver to Kinston and will be completed. And part of the problem is that the Confederate infrastructure is very bad. In other words, railroads are overtaxed without enough material to build new locomotives, to make more railroad iron. So they have a great difficulty. With the case of the Albemarle, they build a fort called Fort Branch in honor of Brigadier General Lawrence O'Brien Branch, who was killed at Antietam, and it's called at Rainbow Banks. It's maybe 12 miles away from Edwards Ferry. And so they have actually 7 brook guns there in case the Federals try to come up river. They're going to get pounded by the Confederate fort, and so that protects it fairly well. So that's the difference. And the Federals never make a concerted effort to try to destroy the Albemarle building site, unlike the Tarboro Ironclad, that once it was barely just the frame was being built, and so it was destroyed on the stocks. And I think that was for the betterment of the Confederacy, because they could concentrate on the Albemarle because of limited iron. Captain James Cook actually will gather up 714 tons of iron and send it up to Richmond. And I got to tell you, he talks to the governor of North Carolina, Zebulon Vance, and he's, I need iron. Where you got iron? I need it. He goes, well, I'll let you tear up the railroad tracks that lead into enemy or alien territory. So they were kind of making the Union Martians, I guess. But the big thing is that he's able to acquire all those items and all that iron. And so that is very effective for the ship, very effective for building brook guns. And so that's how the Albemarle became a success. It was a good defensive position guarding it. It was near a railroad. And as a result of those things, it is going to be perhaps one of the most successful Confederate ironclads during the Civil War. Okay, and we'll learn more about it. So any other questions?
Yeah, we've got one here. Did you say the pine backing for the armor was 16 feet?
17.
17. Okay, great. And then this last one here, you often hear of engine problems with ironclads. Who manufactured the engines?
There were 2 engines for the Albemarle. They were manufactured by the firm of Elliott and Martin. Actually, the engines were designed by guess whom? Gilbert Elliott. And so these are, these are effective engines. They're not taken from other boats. They're the whole thing about the Albemarle is purpose built. I have these 2 engines and twin screws so that I've always got propulsion in case one of those engines breaks. And that is a constant problem with Confederate ironclads. It was said about the Virginia, it could never be more than half a day away from a dry dock, so they could fix the engines. And so they never have any problems with the Albemarle's engine other than on April 18th. And that's when, these are brand new engines. So the ship just got commissioned. This trial run is actually going into battle, just like the Virginia. A shakedown cruise with destiny, we'll call the Albemarle, coming down the river to attack Plymouth. And they capture Plymouth and the entire Union garrison there. And so it's all because they have an ironclad. The Confederates have an ironclad. Okay. Any other questions?
No, that seemed like the last one.
Okay. Well, next Friday, we're moving the time of these broadcasts to 12 noon because we think give people, we notice a lot of people watch it afterwards, which is fine with me, but I think it's very effective. I like to have more people watch while I'm talking, actually. So it's going to be at 12. Plus, I should have spent 45 minutes telling this story. Now, so next Friday, it's going to be a half-hour story, and it should be very, very interesting. Anyway, until later then, once again, I'm John Quarstein, Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center at the Mariners Museum and Park, and we are privileged at the Mariners Museum to offer you these programs. You can go on the website and I write blogs. I've written a blog just about this story. Every lecture I give, you can go and read one of my blogs. And so that gives you more background information. So if there are no other questions, I just want to say thank you and huzzah. Bye-bye.